Good afternoon, and welcome to MasterMinds Lessons in Leadership. I'm joined today by my co-host, Peter Linneman, where we discuss the intersection of strategy and leadership, which is at the vortex of what we feel makes all great companies great. And we are pleased and honored to have with us Gene Kohn, who is the chairman of Kohn Pederson Fox, probably the most highly regarded architectural firm in the world. By way of background, Gene co-founded the firm in 1976. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Gene, you have worked across at least 43 countries over the course of your career and built at least 6 of the largest buildings in the world as well. So with that as an introduction, Gene, if you want to just maybe hit some of the highlights on the evolution of the firm before we hop into our Q&A, that would be great.
Okay, so we started the firm on July 4th, 1976. Bill Pederson, Shelley Fox, and myself. Shelley and I were classmates from school, and Bill I had worked with. I hired him in my previous employer before we started the firm because I thought he'd be a brilliant designer. I wanted to be a top designer, but Bill was so good, I said, he's the guy that has to be the designer. And so we started out in a rough economy, because July 4th, 1976 was nice for the tall ships sailing up the Hudson and the fireworks, but the economy was not particularly strong, and 60% of architects in New York were unemployed. So not a particularly good thing. So, but we were confident somehow we would manage to get through this. We had no money, which was a bit of a problem, trying to hire people and get started. And I went to a friend who I thought I could borrow money. This is a good story. I won't mention his name, although he's passed away, but he was a very wealthy man. And I had taught his son swimming. I was a lifeguard for his family at one point. So I went to Mr. F, and I said, I'm starting an architectural firm, and it's very difficult financially at the moment. Could we borrow some money? He said, I'm sorry, Gene, I'm not going to loan you money, and I'm giving you some very good advice. And he said, the key to your success will be the work you turn down. Now, you have to understand, there's no work.
Wow.
And we had no money. And he's telling me that if I turn work down, that'll be the key to my success. I said, well, this is not going to be a good day. However, he was
non sequitur, right?
So about a week or two later, I had worked in Iran for a number of months back in the 60s and in the 70s primarily. And a bank president called me out of the blue. He said, Mr. Kohn, I'd like you to do my new headquarters. I will pay you $1.3 million fee for the design. And in 1976, that was a lot of money. If I could answer to our prayer, right? But I began to think about Mr. Forbes. His name was Forbes. I said, his advice was that I should turn work down, but we could use the money and we could use the work. So I met with Bill and Shelley, and we met in Shelley Fox's kitchen in Stamford, Connecticut, since we didn't have an office, and discussed it, and made the decision to turn it down because of the difficulty of working in Iran, the fear of not being paid. And it's a good thing we did because the Shah was booted out and left, and nobody got paid for anything after that for a while. So we turned it down, and I was holding on the refrigerator when I turned it down. I was so upset. There was still no money and no work. But it was Sunday, and I looked at the New York Times. We just went through the real estate section. There was a statement about the American Broadcasting Company had just bought an army on the Upper West Side in New York, and was planning to do major development in that part of the city over a number of years. Fortunately, I knew a VP, and Shelley knew one, so we called our VP friends, and we got an interview, which was quite amazing since we were a new firm. And believe it or not, we won the job. I'm not sure anybody else competed, but we won, and our first job was the army. And we did it in 1 year, which was the key to the success for that. And ABC paid its bills within 10 days. That solved our economic problem. But it led to some of our greatest work. For example, in Chicago, Tom Klutznick called me, who I knew from the relationship, and he said, gee, we have ABC as a tenant. I think you work for them, and maybe you could influence them to stay with us and design a new building for them. So we flew to Chicago. For a New York architect to work in Chicago is amazing to start with, but for unknown New York architect, even more amazing. And make a long story short, we got this commission to design 333 Rocker Drive, which became a famous building in Chicago on the Chicago River. As a result, we got
around the corner from us.
Yeah,
around the corner from us.
Okay, so you know the building. That building led to many
Yep.
other commissions like Procter & Gamble's World Headquarters, the World Bank's headquarters, which we wanted to accomplish. Make a long story short, we got many projects as a result of that project. And that really got us launched. And from that point on, we got new commissions and all over the country. And we went from a small street-posted firm in New York. We started growing, and before long, we were over 100, 200. And what happened is, finally, just to take it toward the end, we had one of the economic problems with the downturn in 89 of the economy. By 90, it was predicted that somebody at the ULI, I forget, an economist who said, if you're not global by 1990, half of you will be out of business. I thought he was talking to me personally, so I got very nervous about that. And we decided to go overseas. So I made a trip to London. I knew the head of Goldman Sachs properties there, and they were going to build a new headquarters. And we got selected, very fortunate, and that opened the door to working in London, Canary Wharf eventually, and other places. And then finally, one quick story, I went to, in Chicago, we did a building next to 333 Rocker called 335, and Taisei was one of the developers. Taisei, being a Japanese construction and development firm, liked what we did, and asked me if we would come to Tokyo to do a building with Taisei. I said, of course. So we flew to Japan. The project never happened, but they recommended us for one in Nagoya, which turned out to be 5 million square feet, new station, offices, hotel, everything, which we did, and we got built. That launched us in Japan, and then finally we go on to China. And long story short, we became a major Asian firm over that. So that was all good breaks, but one after the other, and so that's how we got started.
A great story, Gene, for sure. So Mr. F was right. The key thing was turning down the work.
Right. Yeah. I learned that mistake. Worked down.
Yep. So let me start with a question, Gene. I'm sure you probably had a number of great mentors over the course of your life. Who stands out, and what'd you learn?
Okay. There are really three forces I'm going to use rather than just a person that played a role in my life. But one was my mother. She was an amazing woman, lived to be 110, was honored.
Wow.
Was a great artist, and as well as a fashion designer, and had a show at her 100th birthday at the Guggenheim. That's how good she was. And she was amazing. So I would watch her with her dress business, because she was designing and selling. And she would not sell dresses to women. And I'd say, but one of them, and I'd say, Mother, what are you doing? They want to pay you. So, Gene, that's the wrong dress for them. They may not see it now, but it is. I can't sell it because it's wrong. And that taught me about ethics and architecture, about doing what's right despite what even the client may want. So my mother was a force. She also was a leader of our family because she was the smartest one in business. And I learned a great deal just watching her operate. And so she was a big force. The second one was more about coaching basketball. I love basketball, and I coached basketball teams, but they were young people. And I learned about inspiring people and building team. You couldn't win without it being a team. And the reason I mention team is that architects, when they go to school, always say, I did this. This is my design. I did this. There's always the individual. And today, a lot of architectural firms are just one name, the person, right? I began to see that the advantage of team could work in architecture as well. And that if we combined a lot of great talent, we could do even better. So really it was the coaching and then the realization at school, where I've also taught, that students use I all the time. In our firm, we can only use we. We do it together. We have great teams, and we do great work as a result. So that was another first. The final one was the U.S. Navy. I spent 5 years, 3 years active duty, 3 years active duty, 5 years reserve duty. But I learned about leadership, where life and death is involved. and how to make decisions quickly. Both Shelley and I, he was an Army officer, I was a naval officer, both had that skill. We can make a decision in a minute, but having considered the pluses and minuses. That has helped us enormously all through the career. Unfortunately, Shelley's passed away, but our ability to make a decision, it was the right decision, and do it quickly. And so discover, when to move, when to change things. So those were the forces that affected me in my career and still do.
Gene, it's interesting. You mentioned your mother. I remember an evening, I think your mother was about 98, and you were in Philly, and Kathy and I went with you and your mother for dinner. What an amazing lady she was. I still remember that. And the other was Kathy reminded me, Gene, that we met in 1985. That's a few years ago. Interesting, my hair is now your hair color, and yours is still the same as it was then. We're babies. So I have a question. In your introduction, you point out you thought you were going to just be, I don't mean just, you were going to just design buildings. And you end up a truly global firm. You had to change your strategy a lot of times. What have you learned about strategy creation and implementation over all these years?
That's a good question. Yeah, by the way, I wanted to be a designer, but I realized leadership was very important, and building a team and building a firm was a great goal. And so I switched, and Bill Pederson, who's a better designer, frankly, and I realized that. I said, Bill, you design, and I'll do the leading, and it worked out. Anyhow, you have to, you make decisions based on the players you have on a sports team, right? And then things change, and you get new players because the changes require different kind of talent or skill. So being prepared to have to change direction. For example, we always say we're not going to work global. We're going to stay a U.S. firm, primarily New York or East Coast. And I was more in favor of advancing our work around the country, but we didn't think about going to Japan or England or Paris or whatever, despite the beauty of the places. But when the economy started to shift, when things got rough, particularly in the end of the 70s and the early 80s, we had to go global. By 1989, things were mentioned really bad. So a decision that we would never go global had to change. And all of a sudden we became global. It saved the firm, and today we're one of the largest and best global firms in the world, building really some super buildings all over, particularly in China. So that was a big decision change. A third one was when somebody in the firm, one of the partners, decides that he should take over the firm. Basically had a rebellion. I won't mention his name, but he planned it, had been working on it, and it was in the UK, in our London office. And one day I discovered he came to see me. He was leaving, but taking the London office with him. And, I remember talking to my friends at Goldman Sachs, says, don't let him do that. That's your heritage. And the work you've done there is your work. Don't let that happen. So, make a long story short, we had a battle and lawsuits and going to court. But I learned that while you try to trust everybody, you have to be careful, when you see people becoming very aggressive within the firm. You have to notice that and understand what they're trying to do. And he was very aggressive. He was actually using our projects to sell his work so he would get the work. And he left, which is pretty terrible. So, long story short, you had to be careful. You had to be able to recognize what was happening and act. I'm somebody who likes people, good friends with everybody, don't want to have a problem. But I realized this guy was going to cause some major problems. And he was a talented person, but not really trying to do damage to our firm. So we had to make a big shift. All of a sudden, the London office had to change hands, all new people. And we're doing great now with it, but it was a big problem and a scary problem to some degree because I won't go into all the detail now, but he had planned a lot of things, a lot of moves that would have taken all the power out of New York and given it to the London office, which he didn't have control of.
Bill, that's got to be a kind of, you want these aggressive, talented people, but then managing the aggressive, talented people is its own nightmare at times. So,
absolutely. Gene, we've interviewed a number of people, a number of leaders, and this whole issue of culture continues to come up again and again, and how important it is to the success of a business. How would you describe the culture that the three founders of your firm, in essence, built, and how did it contribute to your success?
Very good question. We did. We started our firm on the 4th of July, as I mentioned, and we're having coffee at the Hilton Hotel. And New York was having the tall ships sail up the Hudson, and the evening was the fireworks. So it was a wonderful, exciting opportunity to start a firm. Our culture was one of caring about people in the firm and the future of the firm. So what I mean by that is that we wanted to make a firm that did outstanding work. We'd be recognized for great architecture. As an architect. Second was we wanted a firm where young people could come in and work their way up to become partners and leaders of the firm, which is absolutely happening. So how we train them and teach them, coach them, so they can be ultimately top partners and take over years later was part of our goal and part of our culture. And we ran classes. We did everything we could to educate and improve every person who joined us. And we would try to pick out those we thought would be future partners and work particularly with them. So that was a part of the culture, was that we wanted a future for the firm. And not just a job, but a future for the firm. And the young people would have the opportunity to grow, eventually lead it. By doing that, they did great work going up the line. And that's important. Their performance and their contribution to the firm is outstanding. And we are doing it all over. More young people come and they grow. And right now we have 33 or 35 partners, and before long there'll be many more. So the firm is growing. We're over 745 people. We started just a few, and we're global, and we have many partners. So all that has worked. A plan to coach and create opportunity and help them grow and become outstanding. It's helped the firm.
And that leads to the obvious question, which is, so what's the next trick for the pony? You hardly are a one-trick pony, either design-wise or operating-wise. But we are at an inflection point in the world and the economy and so forth. So what's the next strategic thinking for the firm?
Well, that's a very good question. I'm not sure we have all the answers to that one yet because it's a big issue. I mean, the firm is very large. I'm not sure what the potential growth is beyond that. Since we're so involved overseas in Japan, China is the main part of our work is Chinese. We have two big offices there, a third one in Singapore. So the Far East has become the main source of work. And amazing projects, those tall projects you mentioned in the introduction, are some of the super tall buildings in the world, and they're in China, Shenzhen, Shanghai, places like that, Beijing. So our big opportunities remain overseas at the moment, and so the U.S. really picks up. But so the question is, what are the opportunities for all the people? How many people can become a partner? There's some of the things we're, I wouldn't say toying with, but we're thinking about. How many partners can you have? How big should the firm be? Should it be 1,000, 2,000? I mean, there are firms of that scale, but we're not. And what are the opportunities we can continue to provide for young architects to attract them? So that's stuff we haven't resolved yet, but that's what we're working on. It's a big issue.
Gene, just for scale, for those who don't know your industry, what would the largest firm be in a headcount sense, would you guess?
Okay, there are firms that are in the thousands. So we're big at 745. That's a big firm.
Yep.
But there are firms that are 1,000, 1,200, 1,300 people.
Okay. Yeah.
You probably heard their name. Do a lot of interiors as well as architecture. They're all over the country and the world, and they're probably at 1,200, 1,400 people, maybe 15 in that range. That's not our goal at the moment, to be that big.
No, but I think it's a good for the listener to get just a benchmark was all, Bill, I thought would be helpful in that regard.
There is a firm, and because they do interiors a lot, they need to be in the towns where the projects are, rather than just traveling back and forth. So that encourages them to open more offices than we would do. Yeah.
Gene, let's sort of get back to this issue of leadership, if we can, for a minute. All of us entrepreneurs learn lessons as we build businesses. As you look back on the business you've built, what's the most critical, if there is one, leadership lesson that you learned?
That's good. Well, again, I think inspiration is important, and building a team. Again, I go back to most architects like to say, I designed this building. I did this, I did that. And it's not nasty, it's just that they're proud of it or their ego that inspires it. But that doesn't build teamwork. So we continue to want to create teamwork where we put a team together and they perform really well. For example, in New York, there's a building just finished, One Vanderbilt, SL Green, which we did. That had its big opening the other day, and it's spectacular. It's beautifully detailed, beautifully done by a number of, I was involved. Jamie Montclair was current president, was main person involved in design. And we had a whole group of designers, people working together for every detail, window, doors, ceilings, everything. So there's lots of opportunity for people to grow and design and do things. So the key is getting the talent, making sure they're assigned roles that really bring out the best in them, and also produce the best results for the firm. I mean, that's really the key. And the promotions become an issue. I have to be honest with you. Every time we promote somebody, we hurt somebody. I promote Peter, but I don't promote you, and you're upset. That kind of thing. And we face that all the time. Yeah, we want to promote those that really done special, but there are always others who believe they're equally as good. So one of the biggest staff problems is the promotion, which you want to do, but at the same time recognizing those why you don't get promoted. What do you do about them? And we just went through that the other day with promotion new partners, and those who didn't make it were pretty upset. And so that can hurt the firm if that upset aspect starts to spread. So I would say that's one of the biggest issues is growth in a firm of our scale. And because of the recognition we get publicity-wise, people want to be elected as their designer or the partner in charge. It helps their own status, so to speak. So I make that, for me, that's the biggest issue we face inside the firm.
So, Gene, you've had an amazing individual career, an amazing career with the firm. You mentioned your mother. Suppose I had that connection with your mother right now, and I told you I have your mother on the phone from the other side, right? And I asked her, what makes you most proud of Gene? What do you think she'd say?
Well, that's a good one. I can think of a few things, but first I should tell you that my dad wanted me to be a doctor, okay? He was very upset that I did not become a doctor. His whole family were doctors. So if it took him a while to get used to the idea that I was an architect, he wasn't sure what the architects did. Well, once he got to be fond of that, he would go see some of the buildings and was very proud of his son. So and my mother continued to care about what I did. She was very much an artist, and as I mentioned earlier, so the architectural aspect was a positive one for her. So to please her, I think she'd be, one, proud of my family. The kids, the grandkids are really terrific, and I know she loved them all and was very proud of them. That's important. And one of my granddaughters is named after her. So in terms of that, they both would be proud of the firm. But the firm is so well respected on a global basis. And they still would probably be in Philadelphia. And they would look at some of the buildings I did. I remember when my father passed away, he was watching when the buildings go up and that we had done. And he was very proud of that. So despite the fact he wasn't happy that I wasn't a doctor, he would brag to his friends that my son's doing that building. So I think they'd all be proud of the work and the firm and of me and my family. So I'm confident about that. They're probably up there looking at it now and saying, forget it. I'm
Hardly.
I'm sure they're proud.
So, Gene, I'm sure you get the next generation of leadership kind of around the table periodically for the firm, and you talk about a variety of strategic issues, operating issues, whatever. If you assembled that group and you had to give them one piece of advice about running the firm going forward, what would that advice be?
Yeah, another good question. First of all, right now, we do have other leaders. The old chairman who makes some suggestions occasionally, and they do call for advice, but we have some really terrific young partners who are really doing great jobs, so I'm optimistic and confident. My advice would be prepared for change. Be prepared for the unknown. That's the big thing. Like the pandemic certainly was not something you prepared for, and that affected the firm dramatically and the work we do, and still affects it. And how people come back, don't come back, they want to continue to stay at home and not have to commute. We have all these issues to deal with coming up. So that would never been prepared for. Major crashes, 78 and other ones, were really tough. Projects just stopped. There no new work. How do you survive? I always had to keep a list of names that, despite of the people I would keep under every circumstance. So, these 6 or 10 can't go. Others we may have to let go. We'll have to bite the bullet but somehow keep this group because they're so vital to the future of the firm, not just to today, but the future. And that's true now. We have a lot of partners, and some wouldn't make it. I mean, some would have to leave. A lot of staff would have to leave as the crash came. The economies hit bottom, and we started to have jobs stop. And I remember in 76, it was impossible to get any work. Even the construction stopped, so we didn't have fees for that. So being prepared for what I call it crisis. I always kept a list of those people that had to stay no matter what. If I had to borrow money just for them. I always had that list, because what you don't want to do is let people go who you know are so vital to the future of the firm, just because it's bad now. So that was important. And so I choose people who might go first, or people who should never go, and how to protect them. And Shelley and I sat and discussed this, and we had each had our favorites, but we arrived at one list. So if you're prepared for the worst, unknown, like the pandemic or crash, financial crash, or war. I mean, it could be a war too. You could have any number of things happen. You got to be prepared. What would you do? How would you keep the firm alive? So I would run through those exercises with my partners, particularly Bill and Shelley. And we'd say, okay, this is what we do. And we felt comfortable we could survive.
It's interesting, Gene, you mentioned be prepared for change. We were both very fond of Al Taubman. And I remember Al telling me many, many years ago, the only thing most people hate more than change is the person who's going to make them change. And I still remember that. And yet that's what a leader does, right? Is you have to be the one leading the change. So I have one last question I'd ask. You can see above Bill's head, it says integrity and generosity. Would you speak for just a minute about how philanthropy of time and money and effort and spirit fits into your framework of life?
That's a good one. I should point out I'm chairman of a major charity called Public Color, which deals with young, primarily not handicapped, but unfortunate, mostly black people of color, children. And we help them get an education and jobs and develop them, give them a chance to survive. These are the kids who are at the very bottom. And so charity's always been important. There have been 2 kinds. One, the horrible diseases like ALS or cancer or things of that sort, blindness. Always worry about being blind. If somebody's blind, it's going to be terrible. So always gave a lot of money. I mean, for me, it was a lot of money to those charities. And then also to the ones that are unfortunate, people who are just unfortunate, don't have a good chance to have a good life, help them get started. So Public Color is one that does that very effectively, but there are others. So yeah, I've always been big on getting into charity. In fact, both my wife and I have separate funds that out of our savings and all are dedicated for charity. And every year, I get a scholarship to Penn every year in my name. So that's really expensive. So I do that because Penn was great to me, and I got a great education, and my success is a lot to do with Penn. So I give back, and I get a full scholarship every year.
Well, Gene, thank you. You've had an amazing career. You've built an amazing firm. And as you said, being strategic and driving the communal culture you've driven has really made the difference. So we appreciate you sharing your story with us and with our audience. And we both hope to see you soon. So thanks again.